So first of all, welcome Danny Dorling. He's the Holford and Mackinder Professor in Geography at the University of Oxford, previously a Professor of Geography at the University of Sheffield, which is my alma mater, and before then a Professor at the University of Leeds. Much of Danny's work is available on open access, www.dannydorling.org, with a group of colleagues. He created a website, www.worldmapper.org, which I know my daughter's company has used, which shows who has the most and the least in the world. He's published with many colleagues more than a dozen books on issues related to social inequalities in Britain, and also written several hundred journal papers. Much of this work is available on open access and will be added to this website soon. His work concerns issues of housing, health, employment, education, wealth and poverty. Danny was employed as a play worker in children's summer play schemes. He's learnt the ethos of preschool education, where the underlying rationale was that playing is learning for living. He tries not to forget this, as we all should. His most recent book, with his co-presenter today, Sally Tomlinson, is called Rule Britannia, Brexit and the End of Empire, concerns what the 2016 EU referendum and the 2019 exit told us about the British. He's a patron of the charity Road Peace and a senior associate member of the Royal Society of Medicine. So Sally Tomlinson started out as a primary school teacher and has worked in the universities of Warwick, Lancaster, Goldsmiths London, where she's an Emeritus Professor, and Oxford, where she's an Honorary Research Fellow in the Education Department. She's written and researched mainly about race, ethnicity and education policy. She was a trustee of the Africa Education Trust for 20 years and has worked in Somaliland, Kenya and South Africa. From 2011 to 2015, she was on the governing council of the South Worcestershire Further Education College, which included our own Malvern Hills College. She is author of Education and Race from Empire to Brexit, 2019, The Politics of Race, Class and Special Education in 2015, and with Danny Dorling, Rule Britannia, Brexit and the End of Empire 2019, I think is the talk today. So please welcome both our speakers.
I hope you don't all mind talking about Brexit on a late on a Saturday afternoon. It is Danny Dorling and Sally Tomlinson, and I do apologise, it wasn't my fault that his name is he is more important. Actually, we met, I took early retirement some years ago from Goldsmiths in London, and I've been hanging around the education department at Oxford for some years, trying to understand the relationship between education, employment, social mobility, education and so on. And so I was delighted when Danny arrived, it was 5 years ago now, and we realised that we'd got a lot in common there. So we wrote a few articles and then started writing this book, and of course it's been such a joy, Brexit has gone on and on. But basically, there are many explanations for why Brexit. Our explanation is that, one of our explanations is that it's kind of the last gasp of the British Empire, working its way out of the psyche of the whole of the UK, as it were. It has, a lot of ramifications that we don't really understand, but we're slowly beginning to understand now. We're not arguing in this book for any particular Brexit, soft, hard, in, out, whatever. But we do think that it is the last gasp of the British Empire, that's kind of working its way out of the British psyche. And most of what we've been writing about has been associated with this. Obviously there are other explanations, but we particularly look back at the beginning of empire and the immigration right back to the Romans, if you like, and bring it up to date. And we particularly look at education, and of course, I'm particularly interested in education, obviously. How many of you here went to school when there were pink bits on the map? Yeah. you see. Well, I've got a few textbooks, your textbooks here, you know. I might read a few bits of that out for you. But certainly, you know, a lot of people were nostalgic for empire, you know, when it was, particularly the 1950s, you know, post-war, when it was a nice sort of white area, and there was, immigration was happening, but we didn't really know about it. The education system, in our view, has been a dismal failure over the past 150 years to actually explain what's been going on and why there are immigration into this country, how we actually regarded people in the British Empire, and we still do. You know, what was the British Empire? How is it? Why are we so nostalgic for it? But it's not just nostalgia, as Danny will be explaining. A lot of it was economic, because after the Second World War, when we began to lose the empire, you couldn't go overseas and loot the empire anymore. You couldn't take the labour and the money from the empire. And of course, nobody explained to us either, particularly in schools, why we were getting people from the empire coming to work in the country. But certainly it had economic consequences when the rich got poorer, as it were, and the poor got even poorer. And then we had austerity from 2010. And then also this is all tied in with the kind of people who are governing us. Our current government, particularly again from 1910 and what we've been told, and the kind of people that the education they had. One of the things that Danny and I realised when we were at Oxford was that there was still something called the Bullying Club. I don't know if you remember that. That's the one where young gentlemen, and they are young gentlemen, are allowed to throw bread rolls at each other and then trash restaurants, but they can then pay for it because they are rich. People who were in this bullying club were called David Cameron, Boris Johnson, George Osborne, and you know, other people like that. So basically we have written about, we've actually been quite rude, haven't we, in some parts about certain of our parliamentarians, but we think they deserve it. And we also think that we need a historical record of what's been happening. Brexit and the end of empire, and Danny can carry on.
Okay, I'm going to go on for a bit while Sally finds a choice quote, hopefully, from one of your textbooks. You may have forgot what you were actually taught at school. This talk is very different to Kate Pickett's talk earlier. Kate's is very, very scientific. Kate and Richard Wilkinson, I think, first published their book on inequality 10 years ago. And since then, there have been an enormous number of papers, hundreds and systematic reviews and so on. And we know inequality is highly damaging. Brexit, we're still in the middle of. We're not going to get the definitive story of Brexit for 10 or 20 years. There will be a definitive story. Just as we now have a definitive story, say, of the miners' strike, or of the Suez crisis, a rather short, not too complicated story. In the future, a rather short and not too complicated story will emerge of Brexit. But we're going to disagree, I suspect, on this. Let me show you a few pictures. Immigration. Immigration, when you look at the surveys of why people said that they voted, not just in the referendum, but in general elections, all recent general elections apart from 2010, immigration was the major issue. And you can look at that graph uses census data going back from 1841, the first census in which we actually asked people, where were you born, through to the most recent census. You can look at that and go, look, that's an enormous increase in immigration. We were flooded. I'm looking out at you as a kind of sea of multicultural Britain now. And clearly, you know, it must have been difficult adapting. The second highest correlation with the vote to leave was immigration. It was just negative. The fewer immigrants in your area, the more likely you were to vote leave, and to cite immigrants as the problem. So we're in a leave county now, and it directly relates to immigration. The correlation was about 0.79. The correlation with deprivation, by the way, is 0.03, which is nothing. This was not a vote about deprivation. And we can go on and on and on about this. Because you might say, but the poor areas of the town voted leave. In my town of Oxford, the poor areas voted leave. There are other parts of the country when it was actually the more affluent parts that voted leave. Places like Cornwall, where the retirement areas of people who brought money in from London were more leave than the small towns which had a younger population. Anyway, you're looking at the graph. I can actually jump up and touch this screen, so I'll be careful. This little triangle here, that's the Eastern Europeans. One step too far, but that's it. And you may look and you say, but we've had an awfully large number of immigrants over time. It's getting bigger and bigger. People are just moving around more. That's all that's happening in the world. It's easier to move around. The biggest immigrant group in this country, the most antisocial, the most destructive, the group who do not learn the language, the group who buy houses and make it so that locals can't buy houses, are the English in Wales. Why are there more English in Wales? Because it's easier to move from Birmingham to Wales and drive back because you've got a car. You can phone home and so on. And this is what's been happening in general. Every time we get a rise, by the way, we react to it badly. We brought in laws in 1905 because of the terrible Eastern Europeans who were Jewish coming in. Enoch Powell went out to the Caribbean to beg people to come and work in the hospitals and on the buses, and a few years later he gave that speech, which I think Sally may say a bit about. We opened up early to Eastern Europe. We opened up early. And then what do we do after we open up early and get the most enthusiastic and skilled teachers and plumbers? We go and do this. I mean, it is a shameful record, honestly. We can have a competition about, which country has most badly dealt with immigration in the world, but, our record is pretty awful. But you might say, oh, well, look, it's 8 or 9 million people, Danny, that's a shock. You look at it this way, it looks a bit different. Looks a bit different. And we can go on and on about this. These people who've come, we haven't paid for their education. We didn't pay for the food they ate as children. We didn't pay for their university degrees, which they had in another country. They turn up, we pay them really low wages. They shove themselves 8 into a house in London or Oxford and do everything that's essential. What do? We send 1 million old people out. David Cameron's dad died in France. Nick Clegg's dad died in France. We had a special deal with the EU where we didn't pay our fair share. It was negotiated by Margaret Thatcher. But that isn't the real thing we are about to lose. The real benefit we actually had was immigration. We have different views. I did campaign ever so mildly for Remain. I'm actually extremely happy with the outcome. I think 48-52 is perfect. It brings things to a head. But you can only see that in retrospect. Let's look at immigration another way. The reason for saying it's perfect is if Remain had won by 52 or 54 or 56 or 58%, we'd be heading for another referendum now. And on the way to heading towards the other referendum, we would be maligning the immigrants even more. Everything would be the fault of the immigrants. The nice thing is we're going to have to live with our lies now. This is a stretch map of Europe. It's where areas made proportional to population, so that you're not looking at Scandinavia, which is lovely but is small. You're not looking at mountains, you're basically looking at where people live. The map is coloured by the rate of immigration in 2014. So this was the rate at around the time of the build-up to the referendum. The yellow areas, I see yellow as this. I've learned that people see different colours. This is where you discover if you're colourblind, by the way. Yellow areas, less than 1 in 20 people were born abroad. So that's much of Turkey down here. Much of Eastern Europe, and much of the UK. Because we're very like Eastern Europe. We don't think we are, but in terms of immigration, in terms of standards of living, in terms of infant mortality, Welcome to Eastern Europe. How many of you were born abroad, outside of the UK? We're looking at 3%. Brilliant. That fits. That's what we are. And you're people who come out on a Saturday to talk in the school, which will make you unusual. And people who are immigrants are more likely to do that, so you are absolutely typical, if not, the rate around here may be even lower. The dark blue area in the UK is West Central London, 20% plus born abroad. The other area, which is dark blue, is Northern Ireland. And that is not lots of Polish people coming to Northern Ireland. There's been a few into a particular meat packing factory, but that wasn't enough to turn Northern Ireland blue. The reason why Northern Ireland is blue and the Republic of Ireland is dark blue is, and this is really important at the moment, there is no border in Ireland. There has been no border in Ireland since the Good Friday Agreement. We kind of thought it was easier not to tell you when we made that agreement. You can be born either side of that known border and you can live on the other side, marry somebody from the other side and so on. Other areas of high immigration, whole of Northwest Europe, Switzerland in particular, but have a look at Spain. Spain's really interesting because that Mediterranean coast of Spain is high immigration and you're going to get to meet some of them. You'll get to meet the ones who fall ill first, who come back. Because you've got hospitals here that have just got empty beds that are waiting for them to look after them. Anyway, okay. I should say, we've been doing a lot of talk about Brexit and it does make you a bit cynical. It is very, very important. For some people it's an absolute tragedy, where they worry that their loved one is going to have to leave and they will stay, they don't know what's going to happen to their children. For other people, this is deeply important about the sovereignty and destiny of the British Islands, and we can have an argument about that later if you like. But I do know it matters. This is the biggest thing that's happened since the Second World War. It's 20 times more important than Suez. That is the polls on Leave and Remain in the run-up to the referendum. I'm going to zoom through, but just to show you, they were all over the place. It's showing you as a percent of the electorate, not of those who voted, so we end up with 38% voting to leave, 37% voting for Remain. Really important difference that means it's a settled view of the British people. I think referendum are a bad idea. In general, Lucky Dave called it when he thought he could win it. He called it because he had to call it because this has been a running sore in the Tory party since Margaret Thatcher could no longer slap them down. The minute that Maggie was forced to resign, and she literally would slap her ministers down, it became a problem inside the Conservative Party. And you've got to ask yourself why. This is the map of the vote, again stretched, because there's no point looking at how people voted in fields. On the map, which is near me, we've coloured it by the proportions. On the map further away from me, it's simply by who got most, who got least votes. And you may not realise it, but if you draw a line here, this is the south of England. Majority of Leave votes are in the south. Majority of Leave voters normally voted Conservative or UKIP. Majority of Leave voters were social class A, B, C, 1. Forget about Sunderland, honestly. One thing we can tell you for sure, because the only thing we know for absolute sure is who voted what where. For each local authority district, we know how many people voted, and of those, how many voted Leave and Remain. And in all of the 26 counties of the south of England, more people voted Leave than an equivalent area in the north, a different area with a higher electorate. This was a Southern English vote out. You are in Leave Central. That isn't the story that the press picked up from the beginning because they weren't expecting the result. And they constructed a story that was more comfortable, but it just wasn't true. By age, 90% of people said they voted. By the way, if you ask them, did you vote, 90% will say their vote. They're not lying. They honestly believe they did vote. Most people, you create memories in your head. But these are the best estimates of turnout. The young were in bed. You know, they were in bed. Of those young who voted, majority remain, but they're in bed. It's a majority vote of the old. And this isn't the old being selfish, I don't think. I think the old voted for the good of their grandchildren. When you talk to people, that's what they tell you. But of course, people don't say, actually, I voted out because I want to maximise my tax benefits, you know. Most people don't have that much money. This is a graph of the exchange rate of the dollar to the pound over time. When my granddad was young, he got $5 to the pound. When my mum was around as a child, he got 4. When I was young, he got 3. My first child was born, he got 2. We're heading towards parity. He did the same with the euro. Country has slipped down and down and down economically. And why has it slipped down economically? Why were we so successful 100 years ago? People had to buy our stuff. It wasn't that we made the most brilliant textiles in the world, it wasn't a choice. Once they had a choice, they stopped buying it. That's why the mills are all empty, that's why the shipyards are closed. We told ourselves a story, I was taught at school, about how we invented everything. Every spinning jenny, every other kind of little invention was all made in Britain, and that's why we were rich. Nothing in my school education that we were the heart of the biggest empire the world has ever known. No. It was all learning about Arkwright. I mean, it is utterly ridiculous. Just back to the geography, I'll leave that up for a minute. I think you've got this is probably an opportune moment for a quote from a school book. And we may be wrong, but some of you may find this difficult because just as I wasn't taught anything about the empire or the reasons for Britain's decline, it wasn't the trade unions, it wasn't socialists, it wasn't the British disease, it wasn't immigrants, it wasn't our membership of the EU. We declined economically just like every other former heart of an empire declines economically when you're no longer the heart of an empire.
Danny wasn't paying attention when he was at school. If he was, well, no, actually this textbook is one that most of you in that audience and me probably learned. This is one that went into the 1950s and the 1960s. Here's the British Isles in this geography textbook. If we pick out the British Isles in a map, we are astonished to discover that it's quite small in size compared to the rest of the world. But it is compared with the continent of Europe, the British Isles contains the most powerful, the freest and the wealthiest of all the nations on the face of this globe. Okay, that's all. That's definitely yes. But how did this come about? Well, it goes on. Thoughtful boys and girls. You were all thoughtful boys and girls, weren't you, when you were at school? Yeah. Thoughtful boys and girls will want to know the important reasons for Britain's greatness. First, we must notice that the islands are very fertile, and beneath their surface lies vast stores of mineral wealth. It is not too cold. Not too cold. The climate is equitable, and people who work hard are well rewarded for their efforts. Another important reason is that we live in an island home and our sailors are great. And then there's a quote from Shakespeare, of course, because whenever you're writing about empire, you have to stick the Silver Sea and Shakespeare in. Okay, we've been free from invasion, and this is another reason for our greatness. Well, one reason for that was because we were always fighting countries overseas, wasn't it? But nobody really told us too much about that. The other bit in our textbook, which I rather like, is that the greatest reason of all lies in the active, enterprising and order-loving character of the British people. They have been free for ages, neither ground down by harsh rule nor overwhelmed by heavy taxes, and so on and so on. The rewards of the industry and the perseverance have left them good laws, and the British people have been encouraged to take every advantage of the beautiful gifts of nature with which their land has been blessed. Now, our I remember learning about that when I was at school, and I had such a sort of pride in this, the way in which we were such a great empire. There was also some contemporaries of mine, one guy who had written a book called The Classic Slum, Robert Roberts, and he was living in a slum in Salford in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and he wrote and said, school was a blackened building, but it was made very exciting by the fact that we learned that there were 5 oceans and 5 continents, and they all belonged to us. Now, okay, gradually, this kind of disappeared, but, did it? Because another of my textbooks which I brought here is actually, this is Men of Renown. That was, this was a bit before us. This was 1902. Because a lot of the nostalgia from empire came by this belief that the British were superior. They were superior particularly to black and brown people overseas, as many historians have pointed out. And this book is called Men of Renown. There are actually 3 women in it. They're all queens, so they don't count. Yes, Men of Renown. And one thing it's got in with something else that we all might have been familiar with, which is the Indian Mutiny. Sorry, the Indian Mutiny. And the Indian Mutiny was, of course, a time when, in 1857, when a lot of the Indians got fed up with the fact that the British were ruling their land and taking out their labour and their goods. And so there was a mutiny, and it was put down, with great savagery, actually. But before that, there was the death of particularly women, and if women get killed by the natives overseas, then of course that is, really bad. And so Men of Renown goes on at some length about the Indian Mutiny. Oh, and 100 years before that, the terrible things that happened in the Black Hole of Calcutta. Of course, 10,000 Indians died, but because 180, it was actually 60 soldiers died in the Black Hole of Calcutta. This again was a terrible thing for us. But the other one of interest that I brought is this one, which is a textbook which it belonged to a young man at a Sussex primary school in the 1970s. And Boris Johnson was at a Sussex primary school in the 1970s. And this book actually says in, I can paraphrase it kind of. The book actually tells you that this is 1975. There are 3 races in the world: the Caucasoid race, the Mongoloid race, and the Negro race. And that was 1975, And kids at school, it was private school, private preparatory school, including Boris Johnson at his school, being taught this. So is it any wonder, we ask ourselves now, that there is still this ignorance and this misinformation which the education system has been feeding us for so many years? It is a bit better now, isn't it, Danny? I mean, my children and grandchildren, I think, and Danny's children, didn't have such misinformation, although, I don't know, it might be there.
Okay. But it does help when you're looking at the age distribution to look at what people were taught at school by their age. I'll stand up. By the way, I'll only tell you about this one here. This is Hampshire. More people voted to leave in Hampshire than the combined voters of Bolsover, Doncaster, Hull, Chesterfield, Salford, Stoke and Sunderland. The electorate of these combined is larger than Hampshire. Theresa should have gone to Hampshire, not to Stoke. And this is just true. Right? This is not an opinion of the survey, the geography, and it shows that we cannot even understand the vote that we held in 2016. It's kind of like, God, what help is that for us? But one map of the empire, in case you didn't know, this is our best attempt to draw a circle for every country that invited us in and said, please can you come, British, we love to have you here. That isn't what happened, by the way, in case you never realised. And the date at which we happily left without any aggravation, and the size. The myths of it, I mean, it's not, I'm being cynical, if you don't lose a war, you don't learn history. If you lose a war, you learn about the older generation who got you into that war. If you don't lose a war, and you don't have a terrible slump and so on, if you're not invaded, like France wasn't back again, you end up with a different pattern. How many of you can remember this young lady crying in 1997? When Hong Kong was going? Yeah, nodding. This is a chancellor of my university wiping her tears away. It's his daughter. Chris Patten was last governor of Hong Kong. In the book, we've got the full picture. Just to the side is a gorgeous-looking Prince Charles with this expression of, what the hell do I do? A young lady's crying. And the story was, she's crying because the flag is setting on the British Empire. She cried for 3 hours that day. She wasn't crying because of the British Empire. I hate to break it to you. She was crying because she was having to split up from her boyfriend because her dad was getting a new job. Yeah, and she's written this in the Daily Mail, I think. Everything you thought about empire, so much of it is so wrong. We created a Commonwealth afterwards, kind of face covering exercise. And I'll put it bluntly, if the Commonwealth was that important to other Commonwealth countries, the next head of the Commonwealth would be from India. It's only because it doesn't really matter to them that the next head is not from India. Just look at the size and importance of India. But we're odd. We are exceptional. Our empire was bigger than all the other empires at the time put together. We became the most economically unequal country in the whole of Europe. Occasionally Latvia beats us for a year, but essentially the income gap in this country is wider than anywhere else. Our top 10% now take 40% of all income. We put politicians up who quote Kipling in temples in what was Burma, a quote about a soldier abusing a girl under the age of 18. You couldn't, in the book we lay it on and on and on, because you cannot prove weight of evidence, you can just provide weight of evidence. What's going to happen? The streets are probably not going to be full of people, because we don't protest. We protest at half the rate of the most boring Europeans, which is the Germans. And why don't we? And again, well-ordered people know our place. We have a class structure. Where did that class structure come from? Why do we need it? Why did we need those public schools? Why did you have to teach men in that way to be particularly brutal? Was there something we needed them to be brutal about? Like half the world that they had to go out with machine gun and control. Why do we still have our school system like we do? Like nowhere else in Europe has. This thing matters. Why does the phrase take back control resonate so much? It's not take back control from Brussels. Brussels has hardly any control. Less than 1% of the taxation. But we used to have a hell of a lot of control. And we were doing very well. And it matters. Particularly to leading Brexiteers, and not just Brexiteers. George Osborne, who told his friend Dave not to do it, in 2015, went on the record to say if you followed his economic plan, the UK would be the richest large country in the world by 2030. Why did George think it was so important that we become the richest large country? What kind of obsession is that? Why did he pursue as Chancellor a housing policy through Help to Buy to push the prices in London up to the highest in the world? Because you're winning the global race. The most successful city in the world is the most expensive, and being the most successful really matters. Help to Buy, by the way, for all those properties bought in London under it, I think it's a third of all new build properties have been bought under Help to Buy. We, me and you, we're guaranteeing after the first 5% fall in the house price, which has already happened in London, we're guaranteeing the next 40%. That's what Help to Buy was. Taxpayers will guarantee house price falls. That was clever. We're odd, you can't see this I know, but this red line is the UK, and this is public spending in the UK, currently heading for 36% of GDP. That is very, very low. That is a health service that will not work, schools which are underfunded, no social workers to go and visit you when you become old, so you're going to die at a higher rate. Our life expectancy is falling. It's falling nowhere else in Europe. Our infant mortality rate is rising down to 36%. These countries above us should all be basket cases because they're kind of enacting a socialist policy of taxing more and spending more. Life is better in almost all of them. You may think there's a huge political difference between the Conservatives and Labour, and within this country there is, but Andrew Fisher's manifesto, the manifesto of the last election, would take that from 36 to 38. That was what you were offered in the general election. One of the most radical, interesting general elections for decades. You can move the spending from there to there. We don't overtake a single other country. There's so many things we just don't know about ourselves. We are low tax, low public spending, highly divided, much poorer than we used to be, angry, easily manipulated, and in trouble now. But things are changing. The young started voting after the referendum. They voted in unprecedented numbers in June 2017. There was a fire a few days after, and the way we looked at that fire was different. There is a changing mood. There's been a changing mood since the financial crash. I'm optimistic. After the Suez crisis, okay, admittedly 8 years after, we got quite a radical government, one which changed a lot in this country, including for the first time ever allowing our children to go to school together, which is normal in most of the continent. Attitudes are changing slowly. These are attitudes about whether you're proud or embarrassed by your country by age, or whether you don't have a view. But things are shifting. There's so much more we could have talked about. We're very near the end of our time before we do questions. Of course, views are very different in Northern Ireland, Scotland. Wales, by the way, is spot on the national average. If you were to take the English retirees out of Wales, it would be a bit more like Scotland. Let's skip this. This just shows we're the most unequal country, and this shows that we're not very clever. It's fascinating. It's a test of maths ability, but not at age 15 or 16 when we judge people. This is up to age 24. We teach people. I won't ask how many of your grandchildren or children have got an A star at maths or a 9 at maths and so on. We teach people to get particular grades, which is a brilliant way of teaching them maths so they won't remember it. In Japan, the Netherlands, Finland, South Korea, Austria, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Australia, France, Canada, they do this really weird thing of teaching mathematics and everything else in a way you still remember it a few years later, so you can use it in your job. Now, as in the United States, that's not the reason for education in this country. We're in the school. The reason for education, I'm being cynical, but the important thing about the exams is to sort out the sheep from the goats and make sure the lower orders are sent down and the top, the very high flyers get to listen to me in Oxford University. Explain to them how little their A-level and GCSE grades actually mean. Almost at the end. I won't try and explain this. We do lots of graphs. I'll tell you what the bottom line of it is. The first European election we took part in was 1979. The vote for the far right was 0. 1984 was almost 0. 89, National Front got about 0.1%. Who remembers the National Front? NF, fascists? Okay. 1994, 1.1. 1999, once we got the referendum passed in a bit of UKIP, 7.5. 2004, UKIP on 20%. 2009, Tory party leaves the main EPP bloc, hasn't yet entered another bloc, but we're up to 37%. 2014, and I just wish I'd published this. In 2014, in the European election in this country, 52.4% of people who voted for a far-right party. if you define far right as right of the mainstream European conservative bloc, do you know which country provides by far the bulk of the populist far-right MEPs? It's us. It's us. The Conservatives initially, after 2014, were allied in European Parliament, the Alternative for Deutschland. Somebody earlier was talking about Sweden. They send a couple of far-right MEPs. Right? We're it. We're far-right central in the European Parliament. We're the height of pop. We don't think we are because we're normal, nice, decent, tolerant, and we've got British values. We just send them over there. And it's a crisis. When you're in a crisis, you begin to behave like that way. When you're in a crisis, your Tory party tears itself apart. And to try to keep together, Cameron takes them out of the normal, massive EPP group. And because we don't care and they're not taught about Europe, we don't even know what the EPP group is. I'm going to end on that. Why have things got to the state they are now? This graph was released by Standard & Poor 3 weeks before the vote. And it was an estimate that Standard & Poor, the financial people, did of which other places will be most affected by Brexit. And they produced it for their clients to tell them where to worry about. And this explains why we got almost nowhere in the negotiations all last summer. The most other affected country would be Ireland. Now, actually, Ireland's not doing badly out of it. Dublin, the cranes are all over Dublin. I think Barclays moved 5,000 jobs a few weeks ago, but Dublin is booming. If you want your children to grow up speaking in English, and you need to be in the union, get yourself into Dublin now. Sell and buy. But after Ireland, it was Malta. Malta is a very small European country. After Malta, it's Luxembourg. Then it's Cyprus. Then it's Switzerland, which is not in the European Union and plays no part in the negotiations. Then it's Belgium, which is a very small country. They had nothing to lose. You might say, oh, 10% of German cars come here. They're still going to come here regardless of what happens, because our car factories are closing down. We're going to have to get cars from somewhere. We're just going to get the really small ones from Germany in future. The car factory in my home city, I'll end on this, because I'm sure you've got questions and we've wound you up. The car factory in my home city in Cowley is as more productive as it's ever been. It only employs 3,000 people. Half of them fix the robots, 1,200 robots. It makes a Mini every minute 2 seconds. The profit on the Mini is, I don't know, £10,000 every minute. They've brought the summer shutdown forward to the 29th of March for 3 weeks. Hard Brexit, which I don't think will happen. Hard Brexit, each robot fits inside a lorry. They've got to work out how to get them through Dover. The problem with Dover is the White Cliffs, by the way. Anyway, you couldn't make so much money. The car factory produces a Mini every minute. My university produces the equivalent in terms of export earnings of a postgraduate student every hour. My university is 60 times less productive than the Mini car plant in terms of cash. It's going to be very interesting. We've brought the future forward, if you like, or I think we were lagging behind. We've discovered that what we thought about us was great isn't worth negotiating about on a deal, and it's going to be very tricky. We're either going to revoke or delay. They'll be cold in supporting the 588 pages, which only have 115 words on the entire finance industry. That's 3 lines. Or, and this is unbelievable, given that most MPs know how terrible it will be, we really, really show how low we've sunk. And despite the fact that 500 MPs don't want it, we crash out at 11 o'clock on the 29th of March. I don't think the last one can possibly happen. But we're going to find out. 28 days. Thank you very much.